This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Yet another disappointing game, unfortunately. Welcome back to North Pod, where I just feel like we're in therapy at the moment, week after week. I might have to retire, to be honest, because ever since I've started, it's been a bit of a downward spiral, unfortunately. And just, I don't know where the hope comes from. Every week I sit there and I go, all right, I think we're a chance to be competitive. And it just, it hasn't been happening in recent weeks for the most part. Particularly, I think the part that hurt was that we looked okay in the first quarter. You know, not like that we were going to win the game, but I mean, we were down by a point at quarter time. It was competitive. Two of the goals that we conceded were a bit rough or 50-50 calls. So, yeah, I thought, you know, going into the second quarter, I thought this could be good. This might be a competitive game. And, yeah, no, it was not. Even the forward pressure started off all right, which has been an issue for us as we know. I thought the tackling and the pressure in that first bit was good, but gee, it drifted. So if you didn't catch up with it, North Melbourne lost 65 to 135 against Port Adelaide down in Hobart. A nice 70-point loss there for the Roos. And the story of the game has to be that second quarter. It was just a horrible quarter. We lost the quarter 1-8, and in particular, we let Port Adelaide score 3 late goals, which essentially ended the contest. It wasn't, as I said, I don't think at any stage it looked like North Melbourne was going to win the game, but I would say those 3 late goals in the second quarter put an end to the contest. Port Adelaide put himself a good 40 points ahead, and it was really sort of all over by half time, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, quarter 2 and quarter 4 were both pretty ugly. Quarter 1 and quarter 2 are pretty tight. There's only a couple of points in them, and I think, you know, that's kind of been the story of North Melbourne's season. I don't remember the last time that we had a win in a quarter. It must be quite a while, I think. We've had some competitive quarters. We've had some good play, some decent play, but it's been a while since we've been able to stop the opposition from scoring whilst scoring ourselves for more than 10 minutes. So, yeah, that second quarter was where it really got out of control. Port Adelaide got a run on and just, really put us to the sword in that second quarter, and particularly the end. And that was, that was the story of the game. It was pretty much, the crowd was pretty much out of it by half time. I feel like most of the crowd was just interested in Jason Horne-Francis, and whether that was cheering him for the travelling Power fans or booing him for the North Melbourne fans that were deciding to boo, that was the most they were engaged in the game whenever Horne-Francis was coming off or on or getting a touch. So, yeah, another disappointing result, unfortunately. It was a tough watch, like many of the games have been so far, but I actually have managed to come up with some positives, surprising as that might be. So we'll talk about those in a minute after we've gone through our negatives, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, I had less trouble coming up with some negatives. I just want to do my quick little call to action. Really appreciate everyone that's been sharing me out and interacting with me on social media. So I just want to keep going at it. Share me with any North Melbourne fans you know. Help me get the word out there. And who knows, maybe we'll have a win and people will actually, be excited to tune in to listen to me pull apart a win, whenever that may or may not happen. Subscribe on your podcast service and give me a review or a rating if possible. And just get involved with social accounts, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at NorthPod Show is my handle on most of those. Let's jump in and talk about the bads, because there was a lot, and this one is a bit of a repeat of the Melbourne game. A lot of injuries, unfortunately. So I'll just go through them one by one. LDU is the big one. It sounds like he's done a hamstring, and therefore you would think he's going to miss 3 or 4 weeks, which is not good. Um, in case you were wondering, he was probably our best midfielder today. He had 29 touches, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, and looked really settled with the ball. Looked really composed. Sort of, he's got that, and he's not as good as Pendlebury. Don't get me wrong, different kind of player, but he does have that ability where he kind of is able to move away from congestion quickly, and then doesn't automatically take that the first available option. He sort of assesses and generally makes a good choice. So he's going to be missed however long he's out for. It sounds like he hasn't done a hamstring before, so he's going to have to have it scanned and whatnot. But I mean, hammies are never a 1 or 2 week. They're generally a 3 or a 4, and obviously depending how bad it is, it could be more. It sucks because he did that late when the game was dead. I think it was early in the last quarter that happened. So that's the big injury, which we know when he's been out of the side with the heel injury, the midfield has looked considerably more slow, and the clearances have been an issue. Tucker did a hamstring in the first quarter, so again, you'd think he's out for 3 or 4, something like that. And he'd been, playing okay. Certainly wasn't setting the world on fire, but has held his spot in the side, so that's disappointing for him. It sounded like Flynn Perez got a concussion, so if that is a confirmed concussion, he'll obviously miss at least a week. And then Marnie, unfortunately, a shoulder dislocation. I can connect with that, having had several shoulder dislocations myself across my life. So, yeah, just going for a spoil. I thought it was really brave. But again, I sort of likened him to Lockie Hansen last week, and it was a very Lockie Hansen-like going back with the flight, but not a lot of regard for his safety. He put himself in a pretty compromised position, and unfortunately he hurt the shoulder. So it'll be, who knows, I know that in terms of the footy players, they can either decide, let's reco it and put him away for the year pretty much, or sometimes they try and get you through the year. I know he's had shoulder issues before, so that'll come into it. It's just unfortunate. He's only his second game having a crack, and he'd been okay as well. So just an unlucky couple of weeks with the injuries. We've been really lucky, I think, to start the year. Really, it was just Cherry and Coleman Jones and Wardlaw coming back with some conditioning. They were really our only injuries to players that would be getting a game. And now, with the Melbourne game, we had a few injuries coming out, and obviously today we've had 4, so we were down to 1 rotation in the last quarter. Which again, obviously didn't matter. The game was done, but you'd never want to be coming away with injuries to those players that you do want to be getting time and games into. If we want to talk more about the game itself, we kept, this is a really simplistic view of it, but we just kept losing those 1v1 contests. And it wasn't necessarily around contested possessions. We were okay around contested possessions. I actually think we won that battle, but it was the way that the ball's coming out of those scenarios. And as I said, it was often in those one-on-one contests we were losing out, and we were often when there was even numbers around the ball, we were often getting sucked in and watching the ball, missing those chances to shepherd, or getting too close to the ball and then getting hurt with the spread. There's a couple of times where the ball was inside our defensive 50, and you can see from the vision that we were the North players were getting too close to the ball. They had their eyes too much on the ball. The Port Adelaide players were sagging off, which allowed them to get free and kick goals. And I think that tends to happen when you're kind of under the pump defensively all the time. You're either too busy concentrating on your player, or you're really concentrating on the ball and you don't have that good balance and those good instincts to know when to be doing what. So, I mean, we have been under the pump for the past 3 years. So I can understand why the players are feeling that way. And I mean, look, similarly, like I really want people to, I don't want people to misunderstand me. Like the players are trying. It's not. I didn't watch that game and think to myself, "Gee, they're just not having a crack." I think for the most part they are having a crack, but it's just the want to tackle was there, but the technique wasn't great with the tackling. There was a lot of broken tackles, and I know some people say, "Look, tackles are effort," and to some extent that's true, but you also have to have a strong tackle technique, particularly in the modern game, and it just wasn't there for us. We tackled better than we did last week, but we still lost the tackle count 62-77. So that's definitely something to work on moving forward. I think that too many times our tackles were being broken or they weren't impacting the disposal of the Port players enough. And meanwhile, it felt like we were being swarmed and being pushed backwards with the way that Port was pressuring. So we were just, I think, we were the classic. We were beaten by a better side, better footy instincts, and a more confident side today, which makes sense given Port's, I think, gone equal top on the ladder until at least until Collingwood plays later this weekend. So recording this on Saturday night. So yeah, we just lost too many contests simplistically, and often that was the classic from this year. Generally, we've been losing them emphatically and having intercept mark not taken on us, or sort of clean intercepts. Versus when we're trying to retain possession, it's being punched out of bounds, or getting a ball up result. Like it's just we're not competing well enough and making smart enough decisions to win those one-on-one battles or contests. So yep, that was a big part of why we lost the game. And the other massive part, which I'm sure everyone was, blind Freddy could see this watching the game, the turnovers killed us, and the skills were not good again, particularly in patches. And I think I'd be remiss not to call out some of those players. Curtis Taylor dropped an absolute sitter at one point in the defensive 50. I think it was Jack Zeeble that had kicked across goal to him, and he just, I don't know what he did. He dropped a sitter. Paul Curtis, Bailey Scott, and Flynn Perez were all guilty at one point of just kicking off their shins, creating turnovers, and either directly resulting in Port goals or at least scoring opportunities. Zeeble had a pretty decent game, but he kicked it out on the full twice in defensive 50, which both times Port Adelaide kicked a goal from. And to be fair, like Zeebs was one of our better players, but those were two times where he just picked up, thrown on the boot when he maybe could have been carried out of bounds or kicked it, further down the line, but he made a skill error or a decision-making error. So, yeah, just I think when we're playing these sorts of players, and Zeeble to the side, because obviously he's a senior player, I sit there wondering how many of them are going to develop into the players that we want them to. Playing the kids doesn't make them good kids. And I think we have to be okay with the fact that maybe Curtis Taylor and Bailey Scott and Flynn Perez and Paul Curtis, to a lesser extent Paul Curtis, I think that he has a lot of potential. Maybe they don't have a heap more to go in their development. I'm sure they will grow, and they're still in their low 20s, but so there's still time. But I just some of the skill errors that are being made really concern me. And sure, like they result in a goal, we lose the game, whatever. Like we were going to lose this game with or without those specific turnovers. But there's just some dumb footy decisions being made by some of those players. And I would have thought by the time you've put 50, 60, 70 games into them, particularly we're talking about Bailey Scott and Curtis Taylor there, I would have thought we'd be past that point. Yeah, just turnovers killed us today. 69 turnovers to 56. And the position of some of those turnovers was, really reminiscent of some of our worst games from the last couple of years. And it was a 70-point drubbing. We've copped hundreds, and we've copped some big beltings during COVID, where the scoring was a bit lower with the shorter quarters. But too many turnovers today. It was really, really tough viewing. And the last sort of big negative, obviously, you could go on forever with negatives, but I'm trying to keep it relatively efficient. This one doesn't relate to the game as such, but Jared Healy is really difficult to listen to as a commentator. And I really noticed it during COVID. I would say the 2020 season, I don't either that or 2021, obviously. He commentated several North Melbourne games. He seems to do kind of Saturday afternoon. I don't know if he does Sunday afternoon too. North Melbourne did have a lot of those Saturday afternoon games over recent years. Haven't had heaps of night games, which is fair enough. He's just so negative, always looking at and focusing on the mistakes and the errors. He was even having to go to goal umpire for checking to see if the ball hit the post, which it had, but it was a pretty, it didn't bang onto the post and bounce back. It was a sort of a relatively light deflection. He really grinds my gears, to be honest. I want to stay positive about, these kind of things, and not let it bother me, but he's just so negative. And I know he was a great player well before my time, whatever. I have just zero time for him in terms of his commentary. It's so, yeah, as I say, negative. And I don't think that commentators and special comments people and whatnot, I don't think they have vendettas against clubs or anything like that. But he does seem to really have quite a low opinion of North Melbourne, which, sure, in the last few years, what have we done to change his mind about that, I guess? I just think, I don't know. I think as a commentator, you have an obligation to be pretty neutral in our country. I think there are other contexts where completely biased commentary is, the way to go. I know in a lot of American sports, you can flick it over to the home team feed, so to speak, and get your biased commentary. But our commentary is supposed to be pretty unbiased, and I don't think his is very unbiased, and I certainly think it's negative. So I turned him off during the game. It was just, it was giving me memories of COVID commentating, and he just didn't have anything positive to say, nothing insightful. Some of the umpiring decisions were a bit questionable and whatever. As I said last week, I can sort of ignore that whilst we're playing so poorly because what does it matter? But he found himself agreeing with those, and I thought that they were pretty, the replays, I don't know what replays he was watching, but they must have been different to the ones that I was watching. So, yeah, anyway, he was a challenge to listen to, and that's we'll leave the negatives there because we could go on for longer. There were some positives, believe it or not. I do have, I think, 5 positive things to talk about. Number 1, thank goodness for Nick Larkey. He got some better service this week. He marked out in front really well, kicked 4 goals, a goal in every quarter. And yeah, it just showed what a big difference it was if we were able to hit him on the lead, because he's got enough speed if the kick's good to beat a defender, and if he's marking out in front, that he didn't give the defender a chance. I can only remember one of those being a free kick. I'm fairly sure he had 4 set shots inside 50 and kicked 3-1 from those. I could be wrong, but I certainly only remember one free kick. And yeah, he was doing his absolute best, making the most of the opportunities that he got. I thought, I did think our entries inside 50 when we weren't rushed, which is obviously, the opposition's team job is to make you rushed. I thought when we were rushed, we bombed it. That makes sense. You're just trying to make sure you get some meterage on it. But I do think that we were a bit better when we had on our terms at lowering our eyes or kicking it, a little bit sideways in order to retain possession and get our players in good positions. So Larkey was great. Pretty well supported by Jaden Stevenson and Cam Zerha. It was great to see Zerha kicking goals again. They kicked 2 goals each. So that was great to see. I think, Larkey did have that rough patch, but the 3 of them have been relatively consistent this year in terms of hitting the scoreboard. One of them, and usually 2 of them are generally kicking goals. Obviously, Larkey was nearly the lone hand last week. Steve-O kicked 1, and Zerha should have had about 17 if he could kick straight. But yeah, they both played pretty well alongside Larks today. And Zerha's 3rd quarter goal that he kicked from about 70 out, that was probably the highlight of the game for me. It just shows how dynamic and how important he can be. I think it was Drury that kicked a bit of a mongrel that hit Cam about 75 out and took a strong mark, took a couple of steps, and just drilled a low bullet that bounced once or twice through for a goal. It was a really great goal, and that's the sort of thing that makes you wonder how he missed so many last week. But yeah, so that those taller or like marking forwards, I thought played really well given the service, and particularly Larkey with his four. I think he's got 23 or 24 for the year now. So given the opportunity that he's getting, he's playing really well. This next one's a bit of an interesting one. I thought that we handled the Horn Francis aspect of the game really maturely. Clarko, I guess, set the example during the week by contacting him and just letting him know that it wasn't personal and breaking bread, for want of a better term. Even though Clarko wasn't really here for Horn Francis's time at the club, and I just thought I was a bit concerned that we were going to come out and bruise him and be so Horn Francis focused that we weren't even interested in winning the ball. But it couldn't have been further from the truth. I thought we gave him slightly more attention when the ball was near him. But aside from that, I thought we almost psyched him out just with the way that we were so fair and not. I think that he was always expecting something and it never really came, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. He looked pretty unsettled, particularly early, worked his way into it a little bit. He ended up, Horn Francis, with a goal and 15 touches, but that's certainly a little more on the quiet side for how he's been playing this year. And he had a couple of hits. He got absolutely flattened by Zerha at one point, which the crowd loved. Zerha and a few others sort of crashed through, broke tackles of his, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, really, it wasn't a distraction at all. I thought all of the distraction was with what the crowd was doing. They were booing every time he came off and on, and you could hear the Port fans doing some cheering for him. But the players on the field really didn't seem to get stuck into him verbally or physically at all, beyond the confines of tackling him when he had the ball, bumping him when the ball was near. There was one contest very early on where it looks like I think Horn Francis got tackled and then kind of a ball up was called and there was a bit of a knee or a hand close to his face, but even that, the force in that looked really low. It just looked like a bit of a how you going really. So that was really, I was really, sounds weird to say proud because that. Anyway, I was really impressed with the maturity in that, and I guess the media in particular had been building up this Zerha versus Horn Francis dynamic, and they did spend some time on each other, but there really was nothing in it verbally. And I have to think that part of that is Clarko's thinking and saying, there's a good chance that we're going to get belted here, lads, and you're going to look mighty silly if you're mouthing off, but we lose by 10 goals. So, yeah, lost the game, and in the end, I guess you could say Horn Francis has the last laugh. He kicked a goal and his team won, but it was pleasing to see the maturity in which we handled it as players, I thought. So that was good. This is a bit of a plus-minus, I guess. Goldie was our best player, I thought, which is great for him, but I'd love it to be a younger player, I guess. He's been arguably our best player for the year, I'd say, which is ironic given he missed selection for round one and only got straight back in because of Cherry's injury. Albeit for today, Marshall was subbed out, Port's main ruckman, very early. Didn't have a touch or a hit out, anything. Not sure what his injury was, but he got injured very early, so that just allowed Goldstein to really give Port Adelaide a bit of a touch-up. He had 24 touches, 55 hit-outs, took 5 marks, a couple of decent intercept marks on the wing, led the team for clearances with 11. So, yeah, he had a really fantastic game. We weren't able to make the most of his play, and he did make a few mistakes, had a few clangers and turnovers, but didn't the team, to be honest. It was, another North Melbourne classic performance. So, yeah, he was really strong, and We'll talk about it in a minute, but I think getting another ruck into the side, I think will be positive because at the moment Logue is a bit of a stopgap, and I'd like to see Goldie back to doing 80% of the ruck and then only resting a little bit of the time forward. As I say, he was fantastic again. Next positive were quarters 1 and quarter 3. We only lost quarter 1 by 1 point. We lost quarter 3 by 3 points. So there were periods there where we were able to compete and for the most part, stay with Port Adelaide. You could tell, and the commentators referenced it, that our efficiency and we didn't look as dangerous as Port Adelaide. Our efficiency was not as strong, but there were, as I say, those 2 quarters we were able to stay with them and kind of go goal for goal with them, and we never looked better or as though we were playing better, but we did have those phases of being more competitive, and I guess we have to take that positive at this point, given where we're at and what the games have looked like recently. I was feeling relatively optimistic at quarter time. As I said, I didn't think we were going to win, but I thought, maybe we're going to walk away with a 4 or 5 goal loss and have some good play. But unfortunately, as we know, that second quarter, it really got away from us. The next positive, it's another game of experience into those really young players like Drury and Bergman, Spicer, who got to play most of the game since we had that injury to... now I'm blank. To Tucker? No. Yeah, it was to Tucker really early in the game. So Spicer got to play a fair bit, and Curtis and Sheasel. So those players have got another game of experience into them, and that's what we have to do in order to figure it out by the end of the year who we're keeping and who doesn't have it, who's not going to be able to take that next step. I thought Drury was pretty quiet. I think he only had 7 or 9 touches today. Bergman did a few okay things. Like none of those players shone, but you've got to get the time into them. Paul Curtis did a couple of good things, which is good because he, he's been in and out of the side a little bit. So yeah, we've just got to get those games in so we can make informed decisions come the end of the year. I mean, obviously Sheasel's going to be here for the long haul. I don't think there's any doubt over his skills, but I'd say Drury, Bergman, Spicer, Curtis are all players that we're trying to get a really good look at this year. So yeah, we've got another game into them, and they're that really young, or in terms of they're the least experienced players that got a game. So every game we get into them is either one game closer to them being a great player for us, or one game closer to us realising that they're not taking us anywhere, so we can move on from them. And at this point, I'm okay with either. I've sort of, unfortunately, that's where we're at. The last positive, and again, as I said, I was scraping the barrel, but Greenwood was solid, replacing Cunners. He laid 9 tackles, which is a role that we know that he can play well. It's a role that we need players playing well at the moment. Our tackling hasn't been good, and I'd say Greenwood's probably arguably our best tackler. So he did that well. I think he did just enough to play again next week, because I think for a player like Greenwood, the bar's pretty high. Like, he played better than Drury and Spicer, probably Bergman too, but those senior players have to be playing well, I think, to be getting a game. Otherwise, there's just no value in playing them. But I think he played well enough to get a game next week. It's good to have those solid, reliable players like Shields and Zeeble and Greenwood that can, exactly what you get from them. They're helping those younger players. They're a big body that's not going to be pushed around. So yeah, I think that was positive that Greenwood could come in and do that after having spent a couple of weeks in the VFL. And who knows, like maybe Cunnington comes back and joins him, but my feeling is still that we shouldn't and can't play both of them at the same time. So that's all the talk about the game. I guess we'll have a bit of a chat about the VFL and look ahead to next week. There wasn't really any news that I thought was worth talking about this week. So the VFL had a really big 75-point win against Frankston, which is obviously great. It's good to have at least the VFL side playing well. And Coleman Jones kicked 9 goals. 9 goals, 22 disposals, 11 marks, couple of tackles, had 13 hit-outs, couple of clearances. So he had absolutely, he's got to play next week. He had a great game. Fantastic to see him. And sure, it's the VFL. Let's not get too excited, but that's really, at least he's banging down the door. He's come back in after having the week off for concussion. It's kicked 9. Let's get him in. That was great. Unfortunately, Goda got a bit of a knock to the knee during the first quarter and didn't play after that. But I guess the news from the week was that he's signed on for an extra 2 years, so till the end of 2025, which is good. We haven't locked him away for 4 or 5 years. He's obviously a developing player, hasn't played many games at all. So it's good to give that medium length contract long enough to kind of see what he's got. And yeah, hopefully his injury is either a short absence or no absence at all. It seemed like the talk after the game that it was more precautionary. In terms of the other players, I think Wardlaw had 18, Phillips had 19. Wardlaw kicked 2 goals, Phillips had 9 tackles. So they weren't setting the world on fire, but had some good games. Taron Thomas had 25 and a goal. Cunnington had 23 disposals. So yeah, some players that performed pretty well. Obviously, if you win by 75, you're going to have some good players, and yeah, that they flew the flag, as it were, I think, for North, which is good. But yeah, I'd say Coleman Jones is the only one that's an absolute. I'd be stunned if he doesn't play next week, and I'd be stunned if Taron Thomas did play. I would hope that he's got a bit more time in the VFL yet, even if it sounds like he might be able to train with the AFL side soon, as soon as this week. But I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd think that he'd still be playing VFL football for a little while, I would think. So with all of that in mind, let's have a look ahead to next week, which is Saturday 1:45 at Marvel against Sydney. And again, this is where you get stuck in that hopeful loop. I think this is not a bad time to play against the Swans. I think they're a bit out of form. They've lost this week against Freo. And yeah, their defence is a bit lacking at the moment. They don't have either of the McCartans or Rampy playing. So yeah, it could potentially be a good time to play against Sydney. Obviously, we like to play at Marvel. I distinctly remember playing Sydney, gosh, it was a long time ago now, but playing against them at Marvel and having a draw. So I've got real memories of playing Sydney at Marvel. I think it's a good time to play them. Could be potentially the last time we play against Buddy Franklin, assuming he doesn't get rested or anything like that this week. And in a lot of ways, that makes me happy. He's certainly given us a bath plenty of times, so hopefully he doesn't do that again this week. He's just always, found a way to get a hold of some of our defenders, and Josh Gibson was often pretty good at him in the early days, and then Hawthorn took him. So, yeah, it could be the last time that we come up against Buddy. Hopefully there's no booing like there was when he played against Collingwood last week. In terms of the changes and kind of what I'm expecting from the game, there's going to be some outs just with the injuries. So like Perez, if he's got a confirmed concussion, he'll be out. Marnie will be out. Tucker and LDU will both be out. There's 4. And to be fair, I'd say Curtis Taylor's form is a bit questionable as well. He's on watch. I think Bailey Scott's form is a bit of a wait and watch as well. Like their disposals not been great recently, or their cleanness has been a bit wanting. So I don't know. With that many injuries, they probably do stay in the side. But I just think it's worth mentioning that you never know, they could be out. I feel like pretty much everyone's on notice at this point. If Cunnington can come out, I think anyone can come out. And in terms of the inclusions, I think Coleman Jones has to come in. And Griffin Logue needs to go down back again. He did kick a goal today, Griffin, but I think that he's going to play way better football for us in defence, and I want him and Ben Mackay figuring out how they can work together. there seems to be a bit of a vibe that only one of them can sort of be in there at once. Like it's too many cooks spoiling the broth, but I think they're too good of a players to not figure it out. You want to be able to have two big brutes back there and working together. So I want Logue to go back. I think Goda would have been a chance, but maybe with the injury, he might not. Potentially Ford might get a chance. He was the 24th player for this week. He was a travelling, non-playing emergency. So with Marnie coming out, maybe Ford gets a chance next week. I don't think that his VFL form's been fantastic this year. I know he kicked a couple last week, but aside from that, he's been pretty quiet. So, I mean, in fairness, it's not as difficult as he'd want it to be to get a game in North Melbourne's group at the moment. Yeah, and then obviously Cunnington, Powell, Phillips sort of are in that bracket that could come in to replace Tucker and LDU. None of them are, perfect replacements. I think Phillips is probably the closest to a perfect replacement for LDU, but several years of development behind, obviously. And yeah, Wardlaw, whenever Clarko thinks he's ready, I think Wardlaw, I'm just going to stop calling for it. There's a lot of people calling for him. I'm just going to wait till Clarko actually tells us it's going to happen because they're obviously working away with him at VFL on something. So yeah, he could come in this week, but I sort of think we'd know about it if that was going to happen, but who knows? I was wrong about Cunnington too, so I'm probably wrong about that. So yeah, that's kind of how I see the changes. I'm certainly hoping that we stay the course and we don't try and bring a Howe or a Turner back in, or Aaron Hall. All three of them had okay games in the VFL, and Howe and Hall racked up disposals, but I just think let's stay with the kids. Let's find out, who might be able to take us forward. Even if, as I said earlier, even if we find out that they're not up to it, that's information for us. There's certainly going to be more pain in the future. I do feel probably incorrectly optimistic that we could be competitive next week against Sydney. They do have some fantastic players, but yeah, as I said, their form's waning and they've got some players out. So look, who knows? Home ground, they're travelling, they're missing a few. Anything can happen, and anything includes getting smashed by 100, which could well happen. We know at this point. I think we're just going to try to get through to that bye and reassess. So hope everyone's had a good week. Remember to follow and subscribe. Give me a rating on the podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week. Let's hope for no injuries during the week and we can come out and give it a crack against Sydney. And, yeah, go North.